You know, have you ever noticed how often we just sort of blame everything on culture? Like a country's economy, its politics, even just how people act day to day. You say, oh, that's just their culture. But what if that's, well, missing a huge piece of the puzzle, maybe even blinding us to how change really happens? So today we're doing a deep dive into something really crucial, but often kind of glossed over: the difference between culture and institutions.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it, how often those two get tangled up?
Mm.
It leads to this idea, some call it cultural determinism,
Mhm.
basically the belief that culture is the absolute bedrock for, well, everything, political
Hmm.
systems, society, the lot. But the problem is, and our sources really hammer this home, that view misses something vital. Institutions, they're not just made by culture. They can actually push back against it, go beyond it, sometimes even reshape it entirely. So if we keep pointing at culture as this fixed thing, are we maybe missing the levers we can actually pull for change?
Yeah, that's a really powerful idea. So, okay, our mission today is to unpack that difference. We've got some great examples lined up from the sources you've pulled together. The goal is that by the end of this, you, the listener, will have a much clearer picture of how societies actually work, how they adapt, and why this isn't just, academic talk. It really matters. It might give you a new way to look at the world, maybe change how you see policy, or even just daily interactions. So yeah, let's get into it. The core argument from this article we're looking at, it's got this great title: Culture is not an institution. It really focuses on this basic mix-up that lots of people, even smart people talking politics, treat culture and institutions like they're the same thing. But the source is super clear. They're not. Institutions aren't just born from culture. They can rise above it, challenge it, change it. Sure, they interact, definitely, but they are distinct.
And that really shifts how you look at a society, doesn't it? So our source defines institutions as these repeating structures, behaviors that organize things.
Hmm.
Think of them like the rules of the game.
Mm.
And those rules can be formal, actual laws, government agencies, written stuff. Or they can be informal, like customs, social norms, how we're just expected to act. The key thing is, institutions can often be created on purpose. They can last even though culture changes around them. And they can even spread across different cultures or, outlive the culture they started in.
Okay, so institutions are the framework, the rules, the structure. How does that compare directly to culture then? What's the definition there?
All right, so culture. Culture is more about the traditions, the customs, the norms that guide how we behave. It's often described as more organic. It evolves usually slowly rather than being consciously designed like a law might be. Culture tends to be more conservative, inherently a bit resistant to quick changes. Cultural norms are mostly informal, and importantly, they don't come about through like a political debate or a deliberate design process. They're things we inherit, often without even thinking about it.
Got it. Institutions as the design framework, culture as the inherited habits within it. Okay, that's clear. And this is where it gets really interesting. Our source uses ancient Athens, Athenian democracy, as a prime example.
Hmm.
We tend to think of democracy as just inherently Greek, right? Like
Yeah.
it naturally bubbled up from their culture. But the article says, completely the opposite.
Yeah, this is a really compelling point. Athenian democracy, it wasn't some natural flowering of the local culture. It was actually a deliberate institutional revolt against the culture at the time. Ancient Greek society was all about these rigid clans, powerful aristocratic families, very hierarchical. And the reforms, like the ones Cleisthenes brought in, they actively broke the power of those traditional clans. They replaced old family ties with new civic groups based purely on where people lived, geography, not blood. So these institutional changes, they didn't come from the culture. They fundamentally challenged it, changed it, created a whole new political way of life. And think about it now. Modern democracies exist in tons of different cultures, right? Yeah. Cultures with zero direct link to ancient Athens. Democracy, the institution, it proved it could travel far beyond its cultural birthplace.
Wow. So culture isn't always progress. Sometimes it can be more like a cage. The article uses that phrase, cage of norms, these inherited ways of doing things that just become incredibly rigid. And Sparta is used as the sort of cautionary tale here.
Exactly. Sparta's culture, its norms, were so strict, so deeply ingrained, they basically stopped any real institutional adaptation, that they couldn't change the rules of the game. And that rigidity, yeah, it gave them military power for a while, but eventually it just stifled everything else. Innovation, economic flexibility, it led to stagnation. And then when the world changed around them, they basically collapsed. It really shows that societies need institutions that can adapt, that can break free from those potentially self-limiting cultural habits.
That brings up a big question then. How do societies coordinate themselves? How do these rules stick? And here the source brings in the philosopher David Lewis, talking about institutions as coordination games. It's not just about top-down rules being forced on people, is it?
No, not at all. A lot of social conventions and institutions, too, they pop up because we all kind of figure out it's better to coordinate. We work together for mutual benefit. Think about traffic laws. Driving on one side of the road, we mostly agree to do it because crashing is bad for everyone, right? It's not only the police enforcing it, it's also this deep collective understanding that coordination works better for all of us.
And the example given is the big Swedish traffic switch in 1967 from driving on the left to the right.
Wow.
That's shown as like the perfect example of policy success.
Oh, it's a fantastic example, yeah, because that was this huge institutional change, right, affecting everyone. But it was incredibly well planned, perfectly coordinated, and it worked because it tapped into that clear public self-interest. Avoiding chaos, making things potentially safer or more aligned with neighbors. It wasn't about trying to fundamentally change Swedishness or their culture overnight. It was about shifting an institutional rule for a very clear shared advantage. It just shows that successful institutional change often connects with that basic desire for coordination and making things work better together.
Okay, so if institutions are about coordination, what makes them stick? What makes them strong? The source talks about public trust. Trust being the sort of currency of institutions, saying that in societies where people generally trust each other and the system, it's way easier to get rules, formal or informal, to actually work.
Absolutely crucial, yeah. And if you look at something like, say, the Greek debt crisis,
Yeah.
the analysis here suggests it wasn't really about some, inherent Greek character or a cultural failing, despite the stereotypes you hear. Instead, it's framed as a major breakdown of trust in specific Greek institutions. Problems with tax collection, making sure laws were enforced properly, transparency in government, things like that. Those institutional failures eroded trust, both within Greece and internationally. It's that institutional trust that really allows a complex society and economy to function smoothly. Without it, things start to fall apart.
That really reframes things, doesn't it? Away from blaming people's inherent nature. And the source also gives these really vivid examples of how formal laws and informal norms can kind of rub up against each other. You've got the formal rules written down, state enforced, like getting fined for littering in Vienna, that's clear. But then you also have informal rules enforced just by what people expect, like giving up your seat for an older person on the tram, also in Vienna. Social pressure, not a law.
Right, and then the interesting question is, how do those two types of rules interact? Do they support each other? Do they clash? There's this amazing example in the article. Did you know it was technically illegal for women in France to wear trousers until 2013?
Seriously?
Yeah.
2013?
Yeah. A formal law, still on the books, but obviously completely ignored because the informal norm, the actual cultural practice, had totally changed. Everyone just broke the rule. It's a perfect illustration of how formal institutions, if they get completely out of sync with how people actually live and what society accepts, well, they become kind of irrelevant, even absurd. They get undermined by the very culture and practices they're supposed to govern.
That's wild. And it really shows this isn't just abstract theory. It plays out in complex situations, too, like immigration. The article makes a point that conflicts around immigration aren't just about culture clashes. It tells this great little story about Polish migrants in Ireland and traffic tickets.
Oh, yeah, the Prawo Jazdy story.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. So apparently many Polish drivers, if stopped by Irish police and asked for their name, would just hand over their license. But the Polish words for driving license are Prawo Jazdy. So the police officers, not understanding Polish, would write Prawo Jazdy down as the driver's name on the ticket.
Oh, no. So you had all these tickets issued to Mr. Prawo Jazdy.
Pretty much. And it perfectly shows how sometimes conflict isn't about deep cultural difference, but about navigating different institutional systems. Like, how does one country's system for identifying people match up with another's? Understanding those specific institutional friction points is key for making integration work better. It points towards targeted solutions, maybe better information, or adjusting a process instead of just vaguely blaming culture.
Right, focusing on the practical system clashes. And speaking of different systems, the Dutch model of pillarization is brought up as this really unique institutional setup. This sounds fascinating. Can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, it's quite something. Historically, Dutch society was organized into these distinct vertical pillars, mostly based on religion or ideology. So you had the Catholics, the Protestants, later socialists, the liberals, maybe even Jews. And each pillar had its own set of institutions, its own schools, newspapers, trade unions, hospitals, you name it. People live a lot of their lives within their pillar.
Okay, that sounds incredibly divided on the surface. How did that work?
Well, here's the really interesting twist, the irony, according to the source. This framework, which seems super fragmented and actually came partly from a Calvinist idea about segmenting society, it ended up creating a unique path towards inclusion for other groups later on, because the structure for recognized separate groups already existed. So groups like, say, LGBTQ plus individuals or women's movements, they could kind of use that existing institutional logic to carve out their own space, their own pillar in a sense. They could build their own organizations, media, political voices, and gain legitimate recognition within that broader Dutch system. It shows how even institutions that look divisive from the outside can sometimes, maybe unexpectedly, provide a way for diverse groups to get a foothold and gain influence.
Wow. Okay, so institutions can have really complex and sometimes unintended consequences over time. So let's bring it back. What's the big takeaway here for us, for you listening? Why does really getting this difference between culture and institutions matter so much day to day, or for how we look at the world?
Well, the bottom line is institutions matter a lot. They are the frameworks, the actual structures that shape how our politics function, what's even possible politically. So understanding institutions is just fundamental for making good policy, for building trust in society, and maybe for helping societies get unstuck from what the source calls cultural stagnation. The bigger point here is that just blaming culture, that cultural determinism idea, is not just wrong, it can be politically unhelpful, even dangerous. It kind of lets us off the hook. It distracts from the things we can potentially change the rules, the processes, the institutions by tying everything to tradition, making change seem impossible, or like it has to wait for culture to slowly evolve.
Exactly. It becomes an excuse, doesn't it? Oh, well, that's just their culture. Instead of looking at the actual structures, the institutions that we could reform or adapt. So, yeah, as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something to chew on. Think about situations you see, maybe in your own life, your community, or in the news, situations where maybe before you'd have just put it down to culture. But now, thinking about this distinction, can you see the hidden hand of institutions at play? Formal rules, informal norms, maybe the way things are organized. Just watch how different people or groups navigate the institutions around them. Sometimes they follow the rules, sometimes they bend them, sometimes they try to change them entirely. Could be at work and local politics, anywhere. You might actually be surprised what you start noticing once you look through this lens. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope it's given you some fresh perspectives, maybe a new way to analyze the world around you.